Good morning, Minecrafters, and welcome to the 6th episode of Minecraft on Becoming Free, Part 2. Just say no to negativity. I have to say, it's amazing what I hear out there sometimes. Just out in the world hearing things, and you'll hear people say, oh, so and so is just so happy. Oh, they're just so positive, as if, they hit the lottery or found that last golden Wonka ticket for positivity. Every once in a while, I'll be in a crowd someplace, the Bronx Zoo, wherever, and you'll just hear a negative Nelly in the crowd just sucking the joy out of the atmosphere. It's like, kind of like riding a thoroughbred or something. These beautiful horses are very powerful animals. And if we say that's sort of metaphorical for the brain, let's say in this example, it's like, riding that horse, having the reins to steer the horse, but not doing it, and just letting the horse just run freely and go. We need to have the reins on this very powerful 3-pound magnificent organ. And, with our example of the thoroughbred, once we take the reins back and navigate and control this powerful, amazing organ, we can experience how truly phenomenal the mind is, as well as to experience the mind in a brand new light as more of a loyal, trusted friend rather than the eternal enemy. So we'll begin by talking about why we are neurologically more predisposed to negative thinking. And then after this, we'll move in to the detriments of complaining and assumption making. I think most of us have heard, the phrase, half full or half empty. And this was about a skill referred to as reframing. And I must tell you right off the bat that I'm a huge fan of skills versus talents, where they, the heavens open up and they just land in our lap and we can, compose classical music at 6 or, being an Olympian. And that's all cool. That's all great. I like skills because this gives us autonomy and control because, God-given talents, as they say, just happen. It's genetics and it's whatever it is. Skills we can learn. We can make a choice, a conscious choice to learn a skill set, then put in the effort, practice it consistently, and get better at it. So I'm a very big fan of skills, and reframing is a skill and could possibly be my favorite. So a very brief disclaimer here. In no way am I saying that people with God-given talent, as they say, aren't putting in effort. I mean, absolutely not. That's not the point. In fact, we have a future Olympian runner right in our small town who happens to be a delightful young lady and puts in loads of effort. We see her running all over the place. The point was that we can't just, choose to be Einstein or Mozart. This is sort of the point. In skills, we can choose to, incorporate them into our life and get better at them. So Alison Ledgerwood is a social psychologist who does a brilliant job of explaining sort of the half full, half empty reframe via her own research. So for the first round of Alison's research, she had separated her participants into 2 groups, Group 1 and Group 2, and this was about describing a surgical procedure. For the first group, the surgical procedure was explained or described in terms of gains. So it was said that the surgical procedure had a 70% success rate. For the second group, the same surgical procedure was presented as having a 30% failure rate. So this is the exact same surgical procedure. It's just being presented to one group as half full and another group is half empty. So it's no big surprise, of course, that the first group, where the procedure was presented as a gain, that people liked it. It got a thumbs up. And the second group, where it was presented as a loss, did not like it and got a thumbs down. Then she added a twist and told the first group that this could be perceived as a 30% failure rate. And then all of a sudden, they didn't like it anymore. Then she did something similar with the second group and said, you can perceive this as a 70% success rate, but they didn't buy it. They still didn't like the procedure. Group 2 sort of remained stuck in that original loss frame that they had when she had started the study. Allison then did a similar one after this regarding a governor running for re-election. And the first group was given a gains frame of 40% of jobs were saved. The second group had things presented in a loss frame of 60% of jobs were lost. So, of course, the first group had a positive view of the governor, whereas the second group didn't like him at all. So just like in the first study, things were reframed from a loss perspective for group 1 with 60% jobs lost. And now the group that liked the governor no longer likes the governor. In the second group, things are reframed from a gains perspective with 40% of jobs saved, but group 2 still doesn't like the governor. So the main point here, Allison Ledgerwood has an amazing TED Talk. You should, if you want more information on this. And the main point here is that we are fundamentally predisposed more to negative thinking. In other words, it's easier to go from a gains perspective or reframe to a loss reframe than it is to go from a loss reframe to a gain reframe. And just like we've been saying through this series of Minecraft episodes, is that retraining the brain and becoming the boss of our brain takes first the choice, right? And then effort and lots of practice, lots of consistency, because the neurons are like toddlers that need the consistent direction, guidance, and follow through of a good parent. This moves us forward to our conversation on negativity, and specifically complaining, just that verbal diarrhea that to me is not different than secondhand smoke. It's kind of like if you want to smoke that cigarette, go right ahead, no judgment, and at the same time, I don't want to breathe it. And people often think that they just rant, kvetch, go on these automatic, negativity monologues, that they're going to feel better, when the truth is the exact opposite happens. Now, disclaimer, of course, this is not the same as somebody, genuinely expressing feelings that need to be felt and talked about with, a trusted family member or friend. Not the same. We, again, are talking about the powerful thoroughbred just being allowed to run without the one riding the horse having the reins and guiding this beautiful horse, representing the very powerful and phenomenal 3-pound organ we call the brain. Remember, we talked about earlier, the mind is constantly busy and having a conversation with itself, often referred to as monkey chatter. And Eckhart Tolle, of course, refers to this as the ego mind. He said that most people are so completely identified with the voice in the head, that incessant stream of involuntary and compulsive thinking and the emotions that accompany it, that we may describe them as being possessed by their mind. And as long as we're completely unaware of this, you take the thinker to be who you are. So for Minecrafters, and that's you are aware of this, which also means that now you have the wisdom to fact check and just say no to complaining. I'm thinking about the Nike ad, the Nike ad, just do it. And now we're saying, as far as complaining and negative thinking in general, just don't do it. Eckhart Tolle says that complaining is one of the ego's favorite strategies for strengthening itself. Every complaint is a little story the mind makes up that you completely believe in. Whether you complain aloud or only in thought makes no difference. Some egos that perhaps don't have much else to identify with easily survive on complaining alone. When you are in the grip of such an ego, complaining, especially about other people, is habitual and, of course, unconscious, which means you don't even know what you're doing. Eckhart then uses an example. There are actually two types of complaining. And really what it comes down to is if the motive or intention is to strengthen the ego or is it to bring about change. And he uses an example of being at a restaurant and the server comes over and has brought soup that's cold. To simply, politely and respectfully tell the server that your soup is cold is a type of complaining he says doesn't really even qualify for complaining because your soup is cold and you just would like it returned to the kitchen so they can heat it up. It's about, looking for a change to happen. And he says that this can also be the type of, the ego strengthening itself kind of complaining, even if the server brings you soup and it's cold and you politely and respectfully, or not so politely and respectfully, ask it to be returned to the kitchen to be heated up. If the intention is to be right, then this qualifies for the ego mind strengthening itself. Kind of having that entitled attitude, I'm the customer, I'm paying a lot of money, I deserve for my soup not to be cold. Maybe even having an idea that it's, somebody's fault that the soup's cold, the server's fault that it's cold, this shouldn't have happened, I'm right, you're wrong, take it back and heat it up. Eckhart used to explain that applying negative mental labels to people, either to their face or more commonly when you speak about them to others or even just think about them, is often part of this pattern. He also says that name-calling is the crudest form of such labeling and of the ego's need to be right and triumph over others. And remember, when we're talking about the ego, we're talking about the contemporary concept of the ego, and not the old Freudian ego that's involved with personality theory. We're talking about the ego mind as being the opposite of the authentic self. So the ego is motivated by and filled up by attention-seeking behavior, looking for reassurance, looking for appreciation. It's searching for external approval. The ego also has a huge need to be right and find fault. And of course, the urge to occasionally gossip or pass judgment on someone is catnip for the ego. And of course, because the authentic self is whole and complete, doesn't have a need for any of this. In fact, Eckhart Tolle explains that the ego's needs are endless. It feels vulnerable and threatened, and so lives in a state of fear and want. Once you know how this basic dysfunction operates, there's no need to explore all its countless manifestations, no need to make it into a complex personal problem. The ego, of course, loves that. It is always seeking for something to attach itself to in order to uphold and strengthen its illusory sense of self, and it will readily attach itself to your problems. This is why, for so many people, a large part of their sense of self is intimately connected with their problems. Once this has happened, the last thing they want is free of them. That would mean loss of self. There can be a great deal of unconscious ego investment in pain and suffering. And boy, isn't that the truth. And when people run out of their own problems and drama, there's always the problems of everybody else to kind of glom onto. We just love to dig ourselves, just grab onto the drama, don't we? And when we do, just know that That's the ego behind this. So how can learning to be more mindful help us to kind of get a grip on the ego and throw it back into the trunk? Mindfulness, of course, is about being present in this moment right now. And the ego is no fan of being in the present moment. This is because the ego thrives on thoughts of anticipation and memory. The ego, identifies with our past memories and our thoughts about what kind of fulfillment the future can bring in somehow, some way. In no way does it want to reside in the present moment. And of course, what we practice, we inevitably get good at, regardless of what this is. This, of course, starts with a big, deep breath. Big inhale, big exhale. And in doing so, neurologically speaking, remember that the mind is brought back into the body from next Tuesday, next month, whatever fears are going on about the summer while I return to work. And it's brought back from last Tuesday, 2 years ago, when whatever hurtful thing happened. The mind is immediately returned into the body with a deep, intentional breath. By practicing this welcoming breath repeatedly and returning to the moment more and more each day, we will see a rather immediate reduction in our own dysfunctional egoic thinking. And this has the lovely effect of resulting in far less of a need for reassurance, external approval, and appreciation. We'll be less inclined to gossip or judge, and as what we've been talking about, to complain. So we're going to recap for the second part of On Becoming Free with our discussion on complaining with what we said about the Nike commercial. Just do it, right? With complaining, we're saying, just don't do it. Just stop. Stop complaining. Don't be secondhand smoke. Air pollution, verbal air pollution. I also think it's important to debunk that age-old cliche that misery loves company. No, misery loves miserable company. Let's all do the world a huge favor and just say no to negativity. And remember that we're looking for progress, not perfection, right? If we complain a little less today than we did yesterday, we're doing really well. And let's say we go a couple of weeks and then we start sliding, we're complaining more and more. But then we realize it, okay? So we say, okay, good for me, I'm aware. I'm going to get back at it and complain less. Progress, not perfection. And just like the misery thing, right? Good vibes attract more good vibes. It's a beautiful thing. So the next time you feel the urge to complain, I'd like to remind you of our earlier discussions on how the brain is like a toddler. And the neurons need very clear direction on what to do, and also the follow-through of a good parent. And also like a toddler, to expect the brain to throw a tantrum when you tell it no. So remember that the talk-back party trick or strategy for this one is to tell the brain, not today, maybe tomorrow. And then, just like when we tell a toddler in a busy grocery store, no M&Ms, then their next step is to amp up the tantrum. They're louder, may throw a few fists around, and that the brain isn't going to be different when we don't cave in to the temptation to complain. The brain is going to say, oh, no, this is like we're on the way home from the book club, and this is when we gossip, complain about somebody, or on our way home from work or across campus, when we do all our complaining, or with certain select group of people. This is when we have a complain fest. This is what we do. This is what we do. So when you first tell it not today, maybe tomorrow, the brain is going to really kick it into gear. So just be ready for that. And like a good parent, stay with it. The follow through on this must be very, very consistent. And then, of course, the next day, when the brain kicks up again with there's one complaining about somebody, blame and all that, you just say, not today, maybe tomorrow. And remember that the average time for a habit to shift and get easier and stick is about 21 days. Stay with it. Stay tuned for part 3 of Becoming Free when we discuss how to stop making assumptions. This is Kimberly Quinn signing off from Northern Vermont. Have a mindful day.